And we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Critical Path Institute's Rare and Orphan Disease Program Professional Development webinar series. My name is Dominique Cruz, and I'm a project manager for the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data Analytics Platform, or RDCA-DAP for short. RDCA-DAP provides a centralized and standardized infrastructure to support and speed up rare disease characterization with the goal of accelerating therapy development for rare diseases. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Influential Role of Patient Advocacy Groups in Registry Data Efforts, presented by the Mitochondrial Inherited Metabolic Diseases Task Force. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the presentation for our speakers and panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. The chat function is disabled for everyone, just so we can make sure that we aren't missing any questions that pop up. And all participant lines are muted so we can reduce background noise. We are recording this presentation and it will be available for on-demand viewing on our YouTube channel and shared after the presentation. And here's our contact information if you have any questions throughout the presentation or afterwards. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. First up is Dr. Amanda Klein. Dr. Klein is the Executive Director of the CPA-1 and CPLD consortia at CPAC. She also leads the Mitochondrial Inherited Metabolic Diseases Task Force under the RDCA-DAP initiative. In her role, she leads pre-competitive collaboration among stakeholders aimed at accelerating the drug development process and addressing unmet needs prioritized within the consortia. Also joining us today is Sophia Zilber. She's the Patient Registry Director with the Cure Mito Foundation. She has over 20 years of experience in drug development and is a passionate advocate for patient registries in this space. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds is the co-founder and executive director of the CHAMP Foundation. The CHAMP Foundation is a patient advocacy group dedicated to supporting research to find treatment and a cure for SLS-MDS. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and it's my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Klein, who will kick off the webinar.
All right, well, thank you, Dominique. And hello, everyone. And really, thank you for making the time to join us today for this hour-long webinar where we get to showcase our newest task force, the Mitochondrial and Inherited Metabolic Diseases Task Force. For those who are less familiar with task forces within CPAC, these are new initiatives really aimed at accelerating drug development for rare and orphan diseases. Within task forces are designed to work on specific projects like data integration, disease progression modeling, and trial design tools. Unique to what we're presenting today is the newly launched Mitochondrial Inherited Metabolic Diseases Task Force. We launched in January, so just shy of 7 months, in which, as you see on the screen, this is our vetted mission statement. We have monthly task force meetings dedicated to standardizing and integrating mitochondrial and inherited metabolic diseases into our data analytic platform that's meant to be publicly available for the international community. We aim to optimize clinical trial design and endpoints and enhance communication and collaboration among stakeholders and the medical and research communities at large. We're all aimed at improving the lives of those affected by these diseases. Next slide. Our task force convenes stakeholders across foundations, patient advocacy groups, academia, industry, and regulatory bodies to enhance understanding and efficiency and really leverage ongoing dialogue across all stakeholders for drug development in this space. As I said before, we are just 7 months in and we have 21 members and are growing, with over half of our members representing the patient advocacy group, in which many are either building or have their own registry with the goal of helping drug developers, sponsors with clinical trial design and leveraging the data and the lived experience to help with their individual programs. So I feel very grateful to be part of this task force and supporting the mitochondrial metabolic community. And I want to turn it over to Sophia next to really go through her learnings and how we apply the great work that you're going to see here today from the not only the patient advocacy community, but also leveraging their expertise and data that helps drug development from both lenses. So without further ado, I'm honored to turn it over to Sophia.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, everybody. Let me share my screen. I'll share my slides. One second. Is everyone able to see this?
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me here. I'm a board member in the patient registry director with Cure MITA Foundation. Cure MITA is a parent-led all-volunteer foundation. We are focused on advancing research of Lee syndrome, most common type of mitochondrial disease, and on supporting Lee syndrome community. And my daughter Miriam died from Lee syndrome as a newborn. I also work in the pharmaceutical industry in data analysis, so I really am able to bridge sort of my personal story and my professional knowledge as well together. About our registry. So we started our registry in 2021, and our goal was to have a registry that's worldwide, so anyone in the world can join, identify and find our patients where they are, make sure our data is accessible and available, help with clinical trials recruitment, and share results to the community. That was a really important point for us, and really build a strong community. And so how did we do it, and what did we consider when we started this registry? A very important point for us was that we didn't want to have another registry where we're collecting data with the hope that something will happen in the future. Researchers one day will take our data or something like this, because we know that a lot of times it doesn't happen, or it takes many years until there are any results from something like this. And so we sort of went into it with a vision that it's up to us. If we want this registry to work for our community, if we want to see the results, then we have to just look ourselves. What can we do? How can we make sure that it's there and not wait for someone else to do it? So that was our key, thought from the beginning. Some things that we looked into when we were selecting a patient registry platform, and I will say right away that we ended up with a Quartz platform by Stanford Research. And our considerations, we wanted to make sure there's a data dictionary that's available that we could review prior to signing up. We wanted to review the data structure in a lot of detail, making sure that it's very clear. We know that in our population, most patients are enrolled by their parents. So we wanted to make sure it's clear that there's no ambiguity. Who are the questions about? Who is enrolling? We wanted to be able to collect data that's relevant to Lee syndrome. It's also important to minimize the missing data and for data quality when patients answer questions relevant to them. And our priority was really to collect accurate data versus a lot of data. So we were not trying to do everything in the world and collect all data possible. We were trying to collect data to make sure it's accurate, and we know where our patients are, and we have enough data to possibly serve as a basis for other studies, other research studies, natural history studies, and things like that. In December 2023, a registry guidance came out from the FDA, which wasn't available when we started the registry, but when it was available, we read it, and it was good to see that there's a lot of overlap with our priorities. So the registry guidance does say that you have to have a data dictionary, you need to take steps to minimize missing and inconsistent data, you have to do routine descriptive statistical analysis. So this is all these are all a priority for us, and this is what we were doing from the beginning. So this was really good to also see from the FDA. The Quartz platform that we are using, it was established in 2010, and it's run by Stanford Health, which was around since before 1900. It's on clinicaltrials.gov, and this platform is funded by Stanford Health, so there's no cost to us or to patients or to anybody. And this platform has data for over 3,000 rare diseases now, and it's growing. We have 2 surveys in our registry, and this is the way CORD's platform is set up. There's one survey that's called a general survey. It uses common data elements recommended by the NIH. And another is a disease-specific survey that we could develop ourselves, and we developed it ourselves. And so there was a potential to add additional conditions this way. The general survey would stay the same, and the disease-specific survey would be different. And we did it recently with PDCD community, so we're very happy about that. We are collecting a lot of different information, such as demographic, diagnosis, time to diagnosis, loss of milestones, which is unfortunately very relevant for Lee syndrome kids, disease management strategies, and other information, healthcare utilization, quality of life, caregiver burden. Our Lee syndrome survey was developed by us together with input from the industry and from our scientific and medical advisors and from the patient community. Right now, our registry is almost 3 years old. It will be 3 years old in September. And what did we accomplish? So now we're very happy to see that the registry has really grown. It's the largest registry in the world that we know of for Lee syndrome. We have more than 330 patients. And again, it's grown all the time. More than 40 countries are represented. We have published 2 peer-reviewed papers. One, I'll show more insights on the next slide. It's a paper that describes the findings based on the surveys in our registry. And another paper is about interoperability of our data with CDISC standards. So our data can, we can convert data to both CDISC standards and OMOP standards. And we did these 2 collaborations with our partner, Assumptions Data Sciences. CDISC is data standard that's required for FDA submissions, and OMOP is a different standard for observational data that is used more widely in the academic by academic researchers. And so our data is interoperable with both of these. We are, as I said, collaborating with Hope for PDCD Foundation on the same registry platform. We had 2 listening sessions with the FDA last year and this year, and we were able to share what we are doing, ask our questions, and hear from the FDA their feedback. So that was extremely valuable. We had 4 posters at multiple conferences, and we have now we have the task force with CPAS, which has 21 members, which is amazing. And we shared our data to CPAS already. I will show some highlights on this slide from our paper. This paper was published over a year ago, and it only included data for the first 7 months of the registry, so it was very early on. But the trends are very similar. At that time, we had a little bit over 100 patients that we included into the paper. We included only patients with a confirmed genetic diagnosis. And that was actually 95% of the patients who enrolled and who responded to the surveys in our registry. So we have a very high percentage of those who are enrolling are genetically diagnosed. The median age of the patients was 5 years old. Median age at diagnosis was almost 3. Median age of death for those who died was 2. Some of the interesting findings we had, over 60% of patients were diagnosed within 1 year of the symptom start. So that's very interesting, because a lot of times we talk about a long diagnostic journey, but we found that in Lee syndrome, it's not necessarily as long, and that's maybe because the kids are so severely sick that there's more, it's harder to dismiss or prolong the diagnostic journey when kids are very, very sick, and I know how it was with my daughter that way. In our registry, about 64% of patients have diagnosis caused by nuclear DNA mutation, and others by mitochondrial DNA mutation. We found, the most common first symptoms, developmental delays, lower muscle tone. So some of this are things that we actually know and expect, but that was also good to see that our data is showing us what we know about Lee syndrome and is representative of our patient population. walking was most affected milestone. Again, that was expected. Patients see 1 to 30 specialists, and because we have many countries, that's also specific by country, different healthcare systems. It's also discussed in our paper in a little bit more detail. Mobility devices, feeding tubes, tracheostomy, all of these were used widely. We looked at healthcare utilization. We found that more than half of the patients are not hospitalized, and we were asking for information which in the past 3 months and in the past 12 months. We found that more than half do not have hospitalizations, but those that do, they can have a pretty long ones. And maximum, we had 45 days in the 3 months and 150 days in the past 12 months. And this is all, I really advise you to read the paper because it's discussed in more detail. We found that caregivers are stressed, of course, but overall they're pretty resilient, but still they need support. And we found that many participants, or rather caregivers, assess the quality of life of their kids as good or very good. They say they rarely feel depressed or never feel depressed. So that was very good to see that despite all the challenges, parents see their kids as having a good life and good quality of life. There's a lot more in the paper. These are just some highlights that I wanted to show. So what makes our our registry successful, and what makes it unique, I guess. So it's those things that we had in mind when we started the registry. So definitely knowing our data well, sharing and publishing our results. We make every effort to make sure we share, and publish. We have summarized information. So if you are a researcher or if you're in the industry and you want to understand what's in our registry, we can, instead of getting the raw data and work on it, we can also meet with you and we can show everything that's summarized, and you can quickly understand what it is. And so we did this with many, and I think that really helps that we are able to show that. The way we designed our survey, to make sure that we're minimizing missing inconsistent data, again, being consistent with the FDA registry guidance. We're doing data analysis on a regular basis. It helps us to identify any data quality issues, find any outliers, find if it's a data issue or what's going on, address data issues. Again, it's all consistent with the FDA guidance. Genetic mutation, we standardize it to a uniform format. So many who reach out to us want to know what mutations we have in the registry, and we're able to have it in the uniform format. That's really important, and that's what we really prioritize that. And again, the interoperability with CD's genome standards, and really engaging with the community, trying to collaborate. When we were working on our paper, we had 11 authors. We were very open about inviting people to work with us on the paper, to collaborate with us on the paper, to be involved with the registry. So we're very open and responsive if anyone wants to work with us together. The mitochondrial and metabolic diseases task force, which Amanda already shared. We worked with CPATH since 2021, actually. It was our when we started our collaboration, and slowly that grew into working on forming this task force. And we're so happy to see that now we have 21 members in it. Something that we always emphasize, and that's important, is that CPATH, they have their platform is supported and funded by the FDA, but also CPATH is a neutral entity, and so it makes it easier to share data and for them to be a neutral convener who can bring everyone together. So that's why we really encourage everyone to work with CPATH. It's been a really good collaboration, and I hope I'm sure this task force will continue to grow, and we'll see a lot more. This is my last slide. We have our virtual conference coming up in September. Please join, and we'll have more updates on the registry. And also Amanda will talk, and she'll share more updates on the task force, and everyone can ask questions. Please join the conference, and please follow us I gave you LinkedIn here, but we're on all platforms. You're always welcome to reach out to me or connect. I also have a page with some registry resources if you want to look at that. And yeah, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sophia. All right. And with that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Reynolds, who's also an incredible person with lived experience, background with also data, and a very valuable and important member of the task force as well. So without further ado, Dr. Reynolds, take it away.
Great. All right, can you see my screen, the slides all right? Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. I'm very excited today to be presenting specifically about our patient-reported outcomes in pediatric single large-scale mitochondrial DNA deletion syndromes, which I will now call. My name is Elizabeth Reynolds. I am a research analyst at RTI International, where most of my research focuses on rare diseases and newborn screening. And I am also the co-founder of the CHAMP Foundation. Husband. Our mission is to find treatment and a cure for Pearson syndrome and SLSMIDs. So I've been working in the SLSMIDs research space over the last 9 years in a number of different capacities. Through our work with the CHAMP Foundation, we've funded more than $2 million in research grants. We've also developed family-friendly resources for families after they're newly diagnosed, and also have hosted conferences. Essential to my presentation today, I've also established research infrastructures, including a multi-site natural history study at 2 centers of excellence, and also the first Pearson syndrome and SLSMID research registry, patient registry. And our efforts as an organization to expand beyond funding research projects, basic science and translational science, was a result of receiving a Rare as One grant in 2020 from the Chan Zuckerberg. Most importantly, I am the parent of a 9-year-old Pearson syndrome champ. So through our early work with the CHAMP Foundation and our registry, or through our organization, we realized that the extent that bottlenecks existed as researchers were preparing for SLSMIDs clinical trials. There was a limited understanding of the natural history of SLSMIDs, and patient-reported outcomes describing the clinical course and unmet needs of patients simply did not exist. And so we established Foundation registry to address some of these concerns. And our goals were to identify individuals with SLSMIDs, gather patient-reported outcome data, make this data available to researchers, and disseminate the findings. So I'll show you a quick timeline of our development for the CFR. So as soon as we received the CZI Rare as One grant, we immediately focused our efforts on our registry. We knew that that was going to be a core component of our research network. And our first steps were having early discussions with the FDA and also making decisions on which registry platform we were going to use. And immediately after that, we began collaborating, connecting with other families of children with SLSMIDs. We hosted a community calls with families from around the world, and we wanted to make sure we understood what they considered to be the most important considerations as we developed a research network. Next, we hosted a virtual conference and invited clinicians and industry, and we asked attendees about their priorities for a SLSMIDs registry, and we specifically wanted to make sure we got their feedback about what outcome measures we should be assessing. Next, we began to develop the patient report surveys. So in addition to using existing standardized and validated outcome measures, we also developed system-level surveys because our disease is so rare and multisystemic. And this was a direct result from responses from families and comments about that they want researchers to better understand how the disease affects children. And ultimately, we created 12 system-level surveys. So after the initial development of these surveys, we had one-on-one calls with nearly 10 families of children with SLSMIDs, and we used a cognitive interview approach and had families read questions out loud and describe how they would answer them. And we revised questions clear. We also asked families if they thought any additional questions should be asked. And I will give an example here that one family expressed some mental health concerns about their child. And at the time, there was nothing reported about mental health or behavioral problems in children with SLSMIDs. But after adding that question, we've now come to realize that almost half the children have anxiety and behavioral problems, and now it's a main clinical focus for some of our researchers at Centers of Excellence. So after the calls with families and subsequent revisions, we had a specialist review each system. So we had a pediatric cardiologist review the cardiology survey, an ophthalmologist review the eye survey, and a hematologist review the hematological survey. And finally, we had our CFR working group, who was comprised of 2 physicians from our centers of excellence, review all of the surveys together. And then after finalizing everything with our IRB, we formally began to recruit families. And we've published our first findings in 2021 in molecular genetics and metabolism. So I'll pause here. I think it's always important to notice and to comment on that as an advocacy organization collecting data from families, we're in a very unique position to continually remind researchers that these data are coming from real families and real children. And so here I include photos of 12 children with Pearson syndrome. And I'll also note that there are apparently only 100 cases of Pearson syndrome that exist according to the medical literature. So we have over 10% of families even just willing to share photos for slides like this. So parents of children with Pearson syndrome and pediatric slismids, we know, face significant burden. But despite this, we have a huge percentage of known families who are participating in research to address bottlenecks for clinical trials and provide this empirical data that we need as researchers and pharmaceutical companies are preparing for trials. So now I'll briefly dive into some of the findings that we have generated from our registry. And this is from the first paper that we looked at, or we published in Molecular Genetics and Metabolism. And so in this study, we had at the time 73 individuals registered in our registry, and we included in this study individuals who had symptoms prior to age 5 and a confirmed genetic diagnosis. We had 42 people who were included in analyses, and most of these had a Pearson syndrome phenotype. And we mimicked specific variables that were collected through the NAMDAC registry, which was one of the larger mitochondrial disease registries. And we found that children had a 2-year diagnostic odyssey and required of 4 physicians to reach a diagnosis. And so I know that there's a lot of information on the slide, and it shows the amount of data that families were willing to contribute to our registry. And it shows the prevalence of problems and interventions. So you can see in the parentheses is the percent of children with at least one problem, and interventions are reported in gray. So we can look at the mobility, and we can show that nearly 9 children in our study had a mobility problem. Most were unable to keep up, had muscle weakness and loss of balance. Nearly 75% do PT and 60% require a mobility device. And another example is looking at the GI system. And we found that 97% of children had at least one GI problem. And the top GI problems included failure to thrive, a low appetite, and taking a long time to eat. Nearly 60% of our children have a feeding tube, 50% have tried feeding therapy, and some TPN. And this slide presents the timeline of clinical onset interventions. And this was really important because, again, this was a direct response from what we heard from families. Families had no way to predict what the timeline of when new symptoms would be onset and when they might expect to have or need specific interventions. And so this was the first time that was presented to researchers or families. And so on the right-hand side, you can see that we have the average age that specific problems began. So you can see that pancreatic insufficiency generally begins about 7 years. Hematological malignancies such as MDS and leukemia started closer to 3. And then on the other side, you can see the average age of specific interventions. So we know that children need their blood transfusions very early, but things like dialysis, hearing aids, and cochlear implants usually are required starting after age 9. So now I will shift to the second paper that we wrote using CFR data, and this was specifically looking at caregiver burden. And so for this study, we used 2 specific scales to assess caregiver burden. The first was the Mitochondrial Care Network Patient Needs Survey. This survey was developed by the Mitochondrial Care Network in 2019, and our registry is the only registry that have used this to understand the specific needs of caregivers and families of children with a mitochondrial disease. There was I think there was 46 items, and there were multiple choice questions and open-ended text responses. And how we presented the findings was in 2 buckets. We presented on logistical burden, so establishing care, coordinating care, and understanding medical information. And then we also focused on cost burden specific to time cost and also financial cost. And then in addition to this, novel scale, we also used the Zaret Burden Interview, which is a validated survey with 22 items using a Likert scale. And we use this to assess caregiver psychological burden. So we ultimately had 42 caregivers that were used in this study. And you can see here that we had a variety of phenotypes, but primarily it was mostly Pearson syndrome that was represented. And we described results from these 3 types of logistical burdens. And I'll click through some of these just to give examples of the types of data that we reported on. So for example, while the majority of caregivers reported that they were referred to a mitochondrial disease specialist in less than 6 months, some families reported delays, and that these were most frequently caused because there was limited mitochondrial disease centers close to their home. We also reported on coordinating care. I thought this was a really good example of how important it was to have some qualitative or open-ended text fields that families could describe their experience. You can see that one family said that they were coordinating between their specialists at a center of excellence, which was the Cleveland Clinic, and also their home doctors, which is something that we hear from our families all the time. And then we also have gathering and understanding medical information. Looking at this, it looks like most of our families are leaving their appointments, understanding their care, understanding their next step, but it's always important, I think, when I'm looking at this data, to understand who those 15% are that are leaving their appointments without their answers or their questions being answered. And lastly, and then moving to the cost burdens, you can see that obviously we know that going to appointments like this takes significant time from families. So families are spending multiple days going to centers of excellence. Most of the appointments are not in one day. Centers are not near people's houses. And we're just empirically describing what families obviously already know. And then lastly, we report on financial burden. And I think it's really important here to point out that our registry, like most rare disease registries, is skewed in terms of socioeconomic status. So we know that our sample is affluent, but despite this, 44% said that their visits are still a burden on family finances. And then lastly, here are the results of the psychological burden from the Zaret Burden Scale. Here are showing bars that show the percentage of caregivers who endorsed quite frequently or always for a series of statements. And the most endorsed item was afraid of what the future holds for my child. And we also demonstrated that nearly 20% of our caregivers were at risk for anxiety and depression. So we have been able to share these findings in addition to publishing them in peer-reviewed manuscript publications. We're also sharing these findings with researchers. We recently shared results of our caregiver burden paper at the Mitochondrial Medicine Conference last month. And one of the things that we also thought was really important that we know that there's coordinating care, or there's burdens coordinating care, there's time burdens, there are financial burdens. But when we asked parents what was the most important thing there, what was the thing that their team could do to improve their care, a lot of our families said better research, better treatments, better cures, better options. And we thought that was really important to share with researchers. As Sophia said, what is next for the CFR data? We are continuing to share. That is a high priority. We're working with researchers who are interested in specifically our endocrinology data and mitochondrial diabetes. So we've started that data transfer. We are also very excited to be working with CPATH to share our data. We've given our data to pharmaceutical companies who are planning and coordinating clinical trials for individuals with SLSMIDs. And lastly, we are always interested in other researchers who might be looking to use data like this to analyze and publish on, to get out the data that families have really been willing to share. Now I will offer my email. I'm happy, and I know that we're going to have a question and A, and can answer any additional questions that people have.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. And we do have some questions coming in, so let's dive into the Q&A. All right, so let's see, answer live. There's a couple from Tova Burstein that I'm going to put live. The first I think this goes to Elizabeth. What registry platform did you decide to use and why? In brief, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. We are using ordinal data. And there was a number of reasons. We liked the flexibility that they offered. We not only have our registry data, but we are also getting data from our natural history study put into our platform. And so we wanted to be able to link our patient-reported outcome data with the natural history study and clinician-reported outcomes. So there's an interface that, the research can do that. And so I think that is, the primary reason we went with them. And what was this? Was there a second question? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And then the second one is, who did the analysis and heavy lifting for the papers you published?
I did, and I think that that's, a more unique situation with our specific registry. The two papers that we've published so far, I have done the registry analyses, and that's, a background that I have the skills. I work with SAS, but I think we're really excited that we have a group of the endocrinology team at CHOP that's very excited to have this data, and we are very happy for them to be doing those analyses for this paper.
And likewise, Sophia, for your papers as well.
Yeah, I do the data analysis in SAS. For our paper, we also have a scientific advisor, Danielle Boyce. She's also a rare mom, and she's a data scientist. And so she did some validation where I do the data analysis, and she did it also. And we double checked some of the numbers to make sure we come up with the same. So that was a big help. But generally, yeah, it's me, and that's how we kind of planned this registry from the beginning. We knew we would be something.
Perfect. There's a question from Heather Medlin, specifically asking how is the registry funded? Sophia, if you want to start, and then I can turn it to Elizabeth.
Yeah, our registry is funded by Sanford Health. So we don't need, there's no other funders. We don't need industry funding, and we are not paying.
But you do, like Sanford is a set up so that patient advocacy groups can have a place that can standardize their data for free. Is that for those who may not be as familiar with Sanford?
So like I said, there's basically patient groups can use the registry for free. They can set up their own survey that's disease specific. And they have another one that uses NIH common data elements, which was very helpful when we were converting data to CDISC and OMA. We found how important it is that the data was in NIH common data elements. So yes, we can use the data for free, and we have access to all of our raw data. So that was very important to us to make sure that we have the data, we can use it.
Yeah. And then just to piggyback on that as well is that's efficient for just resource limitations, right? To have such a service available, that can inform both patient, clinician decision-making at the bedside type, but also for regulatory to be in the right format that's acceptable to FDA, et cetera. And then for others who may not be as familiar with CPATH, we do have a master data sharing agreement with Courts Sanford. So data that's in Sanford, we already have it where we can accept that data from Sanford, and it follows all privacy and compliance. But once again, the idea to leverage data sharing across entities more efficiently across therapeutics. So that's important to hear as well. Elizabeth, do you want to add on your end?
Sure. So our registry is entirely funded by the Chan Foundation, and that was possible because of our initial grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative.
Perfect. There's a couple questions that have come in about data sharing especially with industry, and what kind of agreement that looks like, and is the data shared for free or does it cost? Elizabeth, do you want to start, and then Sophia, you can go after?
Sure, we do charge industry for our data. I think that's sort of a business model that we've seen to be an effective way to continue to funding the registry moving forward. We do not charge academic researchers. I think we have a continued interest in researchers using and publishing on our data. And so I think that that's how we've modeled that so far, and it's been successful. So I think for now, that's how we're going to continue moving forward.
Yeah, for our registry, industry does not pay anything, and that's how it's set up by courts. We're not allowed to charge for this data. So yeah, there's no payment.
Perfect. And then there's so many great questions coming in. I'm so glad for the dialogue. Let's see. That one. One question that came up was specifically for Elizabeth, how have you facilitated industry involvement, especially since these disorders are rare? And actually, this is for both Elizabeth and Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, we had one pharmaceutical company that was specifically interested in Pearson syndrome, which again is an ultra rare orphan disease. And so we obviously had a connection with them, you know, from the outset. And so we've communicated. But I think now it's about presenting and sharing and publishing and finding the pharmaceutical companies that are interested in mitochondrial diseases broadly, and then hoping that we can, you know, navigate them towards focusing on our specific indication.
Yeah, for us, it's similar. Companies that are working on Lee syndrome, they would usually want to work with us and we want to work with them. We have a corporate advisory council that companies can join. We meet every quarter. We talk to them in more detail. And yeah, we share a lot. So companies know what we're doing and we're very responsive if they reach out. Yeah.
Perfect. There's two that I think I might lean on Sophia and Elizabeth to clarify that I just put in, but let's see. Elizabeth, if you can just type in the registry you used, and then Sophia, I wrote chords, the data be available for free. That's because Sophia said chords. Can either of you comment on those in the chat is fine. There's two questions that came in from, thank you, Elizabeth. Adrienne McBride, how do you finance the maintenance of the data? And can you share your business sharing agreements? Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first for, you know, the maintenance of the data. Right now, that is, again, me. The CHAMP Foundation has no employees and we are a volunteer organization. And so that is something that I do and have continued to do. And then I guess for data, you mean data transfer agreements? Was that the question?
I think more along the lines of the business sharing agreements with industry for sharing data.
Yes, if someone wanted to reach out, I could show an example of I think we used an example from someone else, so I'd be happy to share. I can put my email in the chat as well, if that's helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Sophia, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just me, and you know, Quartz provides the infrastructure, so that's really good. But as far as, you know, working on the data analysis, all of that's me. Again, we are all volunteer organization. We're very small. We don't have any employees or anything like that.
Perfect. Before I go to another question, I just wanted to put in the chat from Melody Kaiser, who's also part of the task force, that says, just a quick note to thank you all for sharing. Your detailed presentations were so helpful. So this goes back to just the mission is to share learnings and experience and really help others who are invested in ending therapies. So thank you, Melody, and really Elizabeth and Sophia. Bukra Azamoris asked, do patients see their data in a dashboard?
Yes, our patients do. They can log on and they can see a summary high level. So things like, you know, how many patients, I think we have it zoomed out to maybe country because we're so rare. And then we have things like phenotype. I think we do year that they're born. And so they can see a dashboard for that. And then also for some specific things, they can go back and see like a multiple choice question that says, you know, what was your first symptom? They can see what symptom was, and they also will be able to see what the of others' first symptoms.
Yeah, it's similar for us. There's a dashboard and patients can see sort of high level summaries.
Perfect. There's a question and a half about natural history. And it's from Lucy Liu. Hi, Elizabeth, Sophia. Thanks so much for sharing the amazing outcome and insights. Curious, when setting up and running the natural history study, if there were anything that you wish you could be better, could be better to drive what you hope to achieve for your communities. Elizabeth, you know what I'm gonna say, right?
Well, I'm thinking of it also like we have a natural history study versus the registry. So I'm trying to decide whether, my answer should be related to one of those. But Amanda, go ahead. You say what you were thinking.
I'll go after Sophia. Go ahead. Anything you want to?
I mean, I can say that there is a way to think differently sort of about registry versus natural history study. A registry is a more of a broad term, where registry is more of a way to collect and summarize and organize data, while natural history might be something that has maybe fewer patients, but is more detailed and assesses specific outcomes. So natural history study is not always the same as a registry. So I would say our registry is very broad, and it can serve as a basis. The findings we are getting can serve as a basis for natural history studies and other research studies. So sometimes patient groups think of it as it has to be everything. And you can't always do everything. You don't always have the resources or the ability to do it. And so sometimes it may make sense to create a registry that collects, not necessarily everything in the world, but you get accurate data, you know where your patients are, and then that can help with the future research studies.
Yeah, I mean, Sophia, you nailed it. And you even highlighted this when you went through how you created your registry. It's about the quality and accuracy, and not just about how much data, but really the type of data that you can be confident in. And when we think about data, the idea is to have it broad enough, but not so broad that you're going to have so much missingness and you
Yes.
can't feel confident, but broad enough that it can help with individual patient care and guidelines, and helping clinicians and the community on day to day. But it can also help industry with their pipeline and potential new endpoints, and understanding the population better to help, set them up for success when they do proceed with clinical trials. So I think that and this is really highlighting is Sophia and Elizabeth are such spearheaded people in the community that leveraging the community for who have the experience too, and also can the pearls and tricks of the trade is also so important, right? So the part that I was going to add is this a discussion that I've had and been very much so focused on, is about consent, patient consent. And a lot of times, especially in rare diseases, we are so grateful that an industry is interested in our rare disease, and we want to do everything we can to keep them engaged and help them and not ask for anything back. And one of the areas that I respectfully push back and encourage all communities is to have the dialogue with industry, with expectations of what industry plans to do with the data after the trial ends, whether it is a successful trial or failed. That data we don't want to just be put away, but we want it to be shared and have the consent in place and the discussion already set up with the data custodian, to have it where that data will go to a publicly available, because then it can inform new endpoints and help additional drug developers. And I always encourage that type of dialogue up front when we think about any type of data, whether it's from clinical trial or anything. Is the idea is to, regardless, make it accessible for all, right? Okay. Let's see. Elizabeth, Lindsay White asks, how can you be sure that Ordinal is not sharing the data with pharma or anyone else? Do you have a specific provision in your contract with them protecting the data?
Yes, I mean, that was an explicit component of when we signed up with them, that they are not, their business model is not contingent on the data, and that was a priority when we were deciding our platform. Yes.
Um, Bukra Azamori asked, how do you keep patients engaged inputting data? Who
Yeah,
wants
I
to
mean, I
start?
think that that's a great question, and I think it's really important. You know, you talked about consents a little bit, and I think that one of the things that another rare disease group told us is that think about when you're writing your consent, you want to make sure you're kind of considering all of the things that you might be asking your participants to do in the future. So one of them was like, we have a component in our consent that says we can offer incentives. We've only used it a couple times for specific surveys, but it does work. And also I think that sharing the data back is really important. People want to see that. And I also think being very explicit on saying, you know, we are writing a paper right now on behavioral outcomes and education outcomes. Like this survey is going to be data that is used in a paper that researchers at XYZ institution are going to look at. And this is what's going to be done with the data. And that's what families want to see. They don't want to, you know, spend 30 minutes if nothing's going to happen with it.
Yeah,
Yep.
we did something very similar. We were sharing with the patients. If you enroll by this and this date, your data is going to be used for our next paper, for next poster. And I think that's really key, is giving the results back and making sure that patients know how their data is going to be used. That really helps the engagement.
Perfect. And it goes back to trust, right?
Definitely.
It's all about trust. We could probably do two more questions. There's two that go hand in hand. Melinda Marsh from Lehan Collective, she's also part of our task force, asked if data analysis is not a competency for our patient advocacy group, what registry platform would you recommend that can conduct that analysis on our behalf? And then Adrian McBride asked, why not Rare X Global Genes Registry? They are part of the consortium. And so I'll just start with, we don't, at CPATH, we don't promote, you know, one platform or another, but the idea is at the end of the day, we want to make sure that data is owned by the data custodian always, and that the data custodian dictates the level of data sharing. And that at the end of the day, data is available for the broader use. The other part is just like CORDS, Stanford CORDS, we do have a master data sharing agreement that's actually almost finalized with Global Genes Registry for the same idea of sharing data to be available publicly. Sophia or Elizabeth wants to start.
I can just comment on the data analysis part. Data analysis is really it's a pretty involved process. I wouldn't say that there is one platform or another that's better. I think it's good to have a data analyst. If your group doesn't have one, consider maybe hiring one, just because I don't know if there is a platform that can do it for you. It's the registry platform sometimes provides some high level overview of the data, but data analysis, when you do data analysis, is a lot more involved. You have to really look at the data closely. There may be outliers that appear incorrect. You may have to get back to the patients and have them clarify some of their responses and things like that. So it's very detailed, and but it is very, very important. Data analysis is super important. It really helps improve your registry, improve your data, and it's important to start early. So I would say, you know, think about having a data analyst who can start data analysis early. And it's more of an effort in the beginning for them to set everything up. They have to set up their programs and everything. Later on, it's more routine, but there are still things that people they have to look at manually. Like we're looking at mutation that patients are entering at each one, and in some cases we reach out to the patients, we ask them to clarify things like that. So so I'm thinking it's good to have a data analyst. That would be best.
Awesome. All right. So we just have a few minutes left. But Denisha, if you can pull up the slides, please. All right. I did want to do a a selfish but worthy plug for our upcoming conference in September. It's in DC. And before I do, I want to once again thank Sophie and Elizabeth for taking the time to be here, present, and then answer the questions and willingness. You both are very wonderful, so thank you. So CPATH, we have our inaugural Global Impact Conference this upcoming September in DC. If you want to go on the next slide. So you can see the high-level agenda for for the conference. It's going to be 3 packed days and really leveraging how we take data across different therapeutics and then transform it into solutions, whether it is clinical trial simulators, whether it is identifying variability or digital health technologies or clinical outcome assessments or developing using real-world data and real-world evidence. And then, of course, lots of engagement with our regulatory agencies. So putting what's meaningful for us in the community into a framework that is acceptable for regulatory agencies, covering the whole span of therapeutics and also the types of endpoints and trial design. So it's a jam-packed 3 days, but very much so about tangible examples and resources and pearls to support the community. The early bird fee ends on the 22nd, so please register for that rate. Patients and patient advocacy groups are so regulatory, government, patient, caregiver. There is no charge. And so I'm going to put in the chat the information to share with the group, and please feel free to register. And if there's any questions, please feel free to send us an email. Let's see. I actually don't know if I can add it. Let me try. Denisha, if you could put it in the chat, that would be helpful, the link. But we will also, after this webinar, we will circulate the slides and the recording, and then we'll also put the information for the link for the upcoming conference. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us for any outstanding questions. We're all here to support each other and really move the needle forward in many different therapeutic areas. So with that, happy Thursday to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful upcoming weekend. Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.